Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode 70.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
Hi there, my name is Toby Jenkins and this is the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the show for people who love marketing on the web, and today you'll be hearing my interview with David Nihill. Now let me introduce you to David. He's the co-founder of FunnyBiz conferences over in the States, in San Francisco and New York, where the whole idea is to bring business and humour together. He's also the author of his recently released book, which was number one on Kindle and number one in public speaking as well on Amazon, called Do You Talk Funny? 7 Comedy Habits to Become a Better and Funnier Public Speaker. And now David noticed that the best speakers use humour as a really powerful business and marketing tool, and including the best of the best TED Talks. And so he threw himself into an intensive 12 months trying to learn humour and deconstruct that process. And so the book is everything that he's learned and a process that we can all use to improve our presentations and to actually include humour into our presentations. So it's a cracking book. He's a comedian who doesn't like public speaking and who's written a book about it. So it's pretty hilarious. But today we talk about what has and hasn't worked, and we'll dive into details around why his mission is to dramatically improve marketing and business content, his 5-step process, as I mentioned, for making any presentation much funnier. He also has a hilarious approach for following up with influencers, and he shares why he loves the quote by Helen Keller, "Your life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all." So this show is brought to you by our book, Web Marketing That Works, and specifically the bonus 33 free templates that go with it. So you can download them from www.bluewiremedia.com.au/book. So let's get started. Okay, so David, thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome. And mate, I mean, you've got a really interesting, diverse background. You're an Irishman living in San Francisco, and obviously, you know, a former PwC consultant. You've sort of been a door-to-door peanut salesman. There's so much of your background.
Yes, that sounds so exotic.
It does. It sounds so exotic. And when you consider that this is all sort of building up to the fact that you're now an author of a book about how to include and introduce comedy into speaking as well, there's so much that, you know, of your background. Can you sort of share a bit of the story as to how you started off in Ireland and where you're at now?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's the kind of background that gets me either thrown out of interviews or very warmly welcome. There's so many wacky things to talk about. But yeah, I've left Ireland about 10 years ago, and I think San Fran in the States is probably the 12th country I've lived in during that period. So I've done a lot of very different things. Been an expat for quite a while, worked through operations, finance, and marketing, and somehow got thrown into the wacky world of comedy and entertainment and how that lends itself to creating better content and marketing material. And it was kind of all down through a friend of mine who suffered a spinal cord injury. I suggested that he organize a fundraiser, which was a comedy event, and my friends insisted I host it, and I was very much afraid of public speaking. So I ended up turning to stand-up comedy as a way to get over fears of public speaking, which for most people I know sounds completely horrible.
That's talk about putting yourself in the firing line. That's awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like the worst plan ever. And it was a little bit, but it was something I committed to doing for a year, and I figured, well, I'd document everything I learned along the way, and it just kind of kept snowballing, kind of like my wacky resume did. Just one more thing kept getting added. It was a little bit wacky along the way. I turned it into a course, which I sold on an e-learning platform called Udemy, and then I subsequently turned that course into a book. That is the book, Do You Talk Funny? So yeah, it's a little wacky. Along the way we noticed that companies were having the same problems as individuals, that they were drifting away from the core components of an effective, kind of humorous, engaging story when they were creating content. And we also started a series of conferences called FunnyBiz, and a writer platform that allows people to send us written content, and we use comedy writers to make it a bit funnier.
Oh, awesome. So what's that platform called?
FunnyBiz, and we have it down
Okay.
as FunnyBiz Writers. So under that, we have a blog. We have the conference series, which we've been doing in New York, San Francisco, and we're looking to roll out to Dublin and Sydney at the moment as well.
Oh, come on down, mate.
Yeah, I lived there for a year, as you know, about 10 years ago. So I've been looking for an excuse to go back. This could be a good one.
Yeah, sounds awesome. That'd be great. So, I mean, that is an incredibly diverse background. So what do you think sort of ties it all together?
Yeah, it's a tough question. What ties it all together for me is always a strong belief that humor really helps you resonate or break down barriers really quickly and build relationships with people very quickly. It just breaks down that resistance they have to meeting you, and there's nothing like making somebody laugh and that dopamine release to start more of a trusting, engaging relationship. I've always held that central to anything I've done in business. And I think it's probably no coincidence that spilled its way over into my thinking as some form of profession, even be it a little bit wacky. But I think that need, or that feeling that, fundamentally most of us want work to be a bit more humorous than it is, or a bit less boring than it is sometimes. And I think knowing how to utilize one of the most powerful things we have available to us in laughter kind of helps everybody along the way.
There's no doubt about that. And so what fires you up then to sort of get into your day? What's sort of your driver, do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess originally it was that fear of public speaking that I had. And there's so many people these days that are involved in self-marketing or self-promotion, or have moved away from traditional office jobs to where they're not marketing their company anymore, they're marketing themselves. And sooner or later, you need to deal with public speaking. It's going to be very, very important for you to get your message out there. And a lot of people are either afraid of public speaking or harbor some ambitions to be funnier in that realm, or more likable, or more lighthearted, or more interesting. And I think through this book and through the course, it really gave me a way to show these people that basically stand-up comedians have a set amount of techniques to work very, very well, and have always proven to be effective. And business speakers more and more are using those exact same techniques, and they are techniques that can be learned in a much more painful way than I did it, throwing myself into stand-up comedy.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I think that it gets me fired up talking to people at that for sure, or realizing that we have a service that we can provide where, I think a lot of people produce a piece of content and they're burnt out by the time they've got all the information and key points on the page. And the worst thing they can imagine is taking more time to work on that and try and make it funny. They don't have the skills to do it. And also, teaching them a skill set that they can incorporate to do that, or putting them in touch with people that can do it for them. So it's kind of a nice mission to get behind what we had with FunnyBiz originally, which was to abolish boring content. And
That's unreal.
so it was a bit aggressive. It was that combined with help rid the world of boring presentations. So we're like, if we don't have the tools and techniques to teach these people, we'll certainly get a group together that will be able to provide them the expertise that they're missing. And that's what we did with the conference series with FunnyBiz, was arguing that basically, if you use storytelling, comedic principles, and improv principles for creating more engaging content, you'd be more likely to stand out. So we kind of got all the experts we could find together, and that's where the conference series came from as well.
Yeah, gotcha. It's actually interesting. I was just talking to my sister yesterday, and her daughter, who's in year 1, is having to do public speaking every fortnight. She has to get up in front of the class. And apparently it's been identified in the curriculum as just being such an important skill for everyone to know, and for kids to know in Australia, that's going to be, I remember sort of doing a couple of show and tells in the early days, but then some of the public speaking ramped up a bit more in front of the class in high school, obviously, and towards the end of primary school. But to think that it's given that much importance now just was incredible, I thought.
Yeah, I think it's huge, and that's growing with mediums like TED. The effect having a TED Talk can have on your career is well documented, and having a good talk and getting themselves out there can have a massive effect on whether you're selling or representing your company or your own product. But yeah, I think it's huge from school all the way through. And then when I grew up in Ireland, it wasn't big in school. I mean, we hid from public speaking at every opportunity. In university, I remember drinking 4 or 5 bottles of Corona before doing one talk just to calm my nerves, which as it sounds, was not a good idea whatsoever. But, it was just such a challenge. And I'm a pretty chatty person most of the time, but I absolutely went to pieces when it came time to go on stage. So I was like, well, if I have this problem. And I think as soon as I put up the course, the very first guy who contacted me was one of the guys on the TV program in the US, Shark Tank, who has a net worth of about 400 million. I figure if he has this problem to try and be more engaging and funny and lighthearted in public speaking, then surely the average person must be in a world of trouble with it.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was kind of aha moment for me when I was like, wow, okay, one, someone's willing to pay for this information that I've kind of collated over the last year, which is pretty cool. But two, this guy is at such a high level, I wouldn't even imagine it. And it turns out that any of the speakers we've worked with over the last year, so through FunnyBiz Writer, we ended up working with a lot of TED-level speakers or best-selling writers, and they all seem to have the same problem. How do I make it a bit lighthearted, a bit more entertaining? How do I get more laughs?
Yeah, that's a great introduction point for us, I think, to jump into how do you do that? I mean, marketers, business owners, and no doubt are presenting themselves. I mean, whether presenting is formally in front of, big audiences or whether it's just in front of your team even, right? Like there's all sorts of different levels of presenting. So yeah, how do you do that? And that was one of the things that I loved about your book was that how you were able to distill your experience and deconstruct it. So then it's a replicable process for people who are keen to apply your lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess what I found over the year in comedy that people as an audience in any format love to argue with opinions, and they're not as open to you enforcing your opinions on them. So if you deliver information you have in the form of opinion and are kind of outspoken about it, you tend to lose people fairly quickly, or at least a high percentage of the people. Whereas if you deliver that information as a story, you have a chance of convincing them and you're not seem to be as forceful with your ideas. And it's the same in comedy. If you throw out something that's a real opinion, you tend to lose some of the audience. So when you're seeking to be funnier, the argument of my book and from my own experience over a year in studying other comedians and talking to leading comedians and business speakers was to start first with a story. And all the better if that story is something from your own personal life. So to try and find the humor in these things, you basically want to create a list of stories from your own life that you think are pretty entertaining, that you're comfortable with telling already.
Sorry, David, just to that point, I've actually started my funny file.
Oh, nice work.
It's pretty sparse at the moment, but I am working on it.
It will grow. Yeah, worst case scenario, just drink 15 beers and go out for a walk and something's going to happen to you. Yeah. How you tie that back to business, I have no idea, but don't blame me for that one. But it's just when you're forced to think about it, if you go check out a comedy show or you see another speaker, it always jogs your memory of little things that have happened to you from your life. And an important point to remember is they don't have to be your stories. I mean, it can be a short story from a book that you really enjoyed. Most people in the world have not read even a best-selling book. Like the average person isn't familiar with the content of that. So even using something like that and tying it to your talk, it's just anything that you're passionate about and grabs you. And then delivering that story in its shortest, most effective form like a stand-up comedian would do. So they will be ruthless on taking out words. A stand-up comic will deliver a joke. He'll video himself doing it, and he'll watch it back and rewrite it and watch it back again and get it down to its finest, most impactful words. So basically setting it up, your story, as quickly as effectively and possibly, and getting to the funny part as quick as you can. And then linking that to a business topic that you're presenting on. Which most of the time is pretty easy to do.
Yeah, it's actually, we have dabbled with humour in our, meaningfully and purposefully included humour in our presentations as well, Adam and I. And it's funny how frequently you can tweak a joke or something that gets a laugh, and we scatter them throughout, and then tweak it for the given topic depending on who the audience is.
Exactly, and it can be kind of loosely related. This is probably going to be a terrible example, but I was just preparing something for a talk yesterday, and I was thinking, what's the worst example that you probably couldn't tie back to business? And I was thinking if you took something like when I was, I think 5 or 6 years old, I peed or urinated on an electrical fence. And that was obviously not a good decision for me in any way, shape, or form, and something that left me with a very memorable experience. Now, turn that into a business lesson. So this was, I was asking a class of people to do yesterday. I'm like, all right, it's a personal story. It's a little bit wacky. It's definitely funny. How can this become a business lesson? So, of course, hands go up straight away, and they're like, market entry strategy, like know your competitors, know your surroundings, know your environment. And then sure enough, you have something that you can tie to business. I wouldn't suggest going with that particular one, but it's not super hard to do on a macro level. And I think if you look at Ken Robinson's talk, or he is, I think, over 28 million views and the most watched TED Talk of all time. And he has a number of stories in there that are not directly related to his topic, but within the overall context, they work really well and they're super funny.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so sorry, I have interrupted you there. So the process, and which is on the blog, and I'll link to that as well, that you wrote for us, is find your own stories, find the funny within them, and then you sort of talk about joke structure and details. And so how does that sort of work?
Yeah, so you always want to rewrite it in its most effective form. So joke structure just means is a 3-point structure of essentially setting it up or introducing that topic, delivering the funny part of the story, which a comedian would call the punchline, and then adding any additional laugh lines to it, which in comedy circles are called taglines, which are totally optional. But if you use that
taglines
structure,
are sort of where you add to the joke and people get another laugh out of it. Is that the idea?
Exactly. So if I said I peed on an electric fence, most people will laugh straight away. And if I add to that and say that was not the smartest thing I've ever done, which is very clear, but it's a tagline and is likely to produce a smaller laugh, probably not the same strength of laugh as the original comment, but yeah, that would be a tagline. Yeah, so just a secondary joke based on the first initial joke to try and squeeze some more laughter out of it. But if you introduce that then in that story in its shortest, most effective form, comedy writing structure just forces you to take out all the unnecessary words. It's like Shakespeare would say, brevity is levity. You really want to use the shortest amount of words to make your point.
And I love some of the quotes in your book, actually. I've been really enjoying them. There was another one, the end of laughter is followed by the height of listening. By Jeffrey Gitomer?
Yeah, I don't know. I hate saying his name because I have no clue how to pronounce it.
That's a cracker.
Yeah, I think it's a great comment, and I think any speaker who's been on stage and said something funny, they just know that people are hanging on your next words once you say something funny, once you make people laugh. So when we studied a number of leading TED Talks, and we basically applied a metric called laughs per minute, which is something comedians do when they're trying to record and score how many times they make people laugh and how hard. And we realized that most of the best TED Talks have hugely high laugh per minute rates, enough to rival the funniest movies of all time. Wow. If you just on a per minute base. So it was very clear that top business speakers were using humor, and some of them really, really well. The only thing that was evident when we talked to these guys is that they weren't as aware that they were in a process. If a comedian said the same thing, they would be aware a lot quicker that they were involved in a process, and they know they need to rework it repeatedly, whereas the business speakers just happened to be kind of stumbling upon funny bits. A lot of them weren't actually watching themselves or reviewing it to see what worked, and they were just kind of used to telling it over and over again without that conscious review and editing that a comedian would do, or structural adjustment to the material.
Yeah, sure. Oh, wow.
So basically, that was the kind of the core argument of the book. The business speakers are using humor. The difference is most of them don't know that they're involved in this process. And it is actually a process. Comedians, as the ultimate business speakers and storytellers, have mastered it and been using it for a long time. What can we learn from them as business speakers?
Yeah, and so I'm intrigued by your sort of process too, in terms of getting to the book. And I know you referenced Tim Ferriss in your intro for the book, and you talk about that sort of process of deconstruction of a skill set and throwing yourself in to try to find that 80-20, the Pareto principle of, 20% of your work delivers, in this instance, 80% of your laughs, I'm sure, and the skill. So can you walk us through that process and sort of what you did in terms of preparing for the book?
Yeah, sure. That process was painful. I threw myself into all sorts of comedy nights and open mic nights, storytelling nights, events, basically any opportunity to get on stage. I read a number of really good public speaking books, like Talk Like Ted would be one that I recommend highly. Confessions of a Public Speaker is also a really
a cracker, isn't it? Scott Berkin's book.
Yeah, and the funny thing...
That's laugh out loud, that book, actually.
Yeah, it's really good. I can't say it's better than mine, but it definitely is. I mean, I shouldn't say it's better than mine, but it is. But the funny thing with all those books is they all say, oh, comedians are the masters of public speaking and you should be humorous, but they don't say how to do it, which is, people are like, okay, great, I know I need to do this, but now how do I do it? So what I was trying to do was talk to all these comedians, talk to as many successful business speakers as I can, read as much as I can around the topic, and then try and distill it by testing it on myself. So a lot of these structures I tested. I videoed everything I did over the last year on stage. Some of those I wish I had burned and deleted them and thrown out the window, but they're still here. They're pretty painful watching sometimes. But there's a very clear progression within that. And no matter what story I told, once I told it following, rewrote it, and used joke structure, it was always more effective. So it was just kind of forcing myself to watch my own pain on stage, I guess, for the most part. I digested that, and I summed it up in an e-course, and I started making that available on Udemy, and I made the initial ones free on Reddit, on a forum on there, which was within a group called Social Engineering, and I had about 1,000 people sign up. And based on the feedback of trying to reteach my stuff to those guys and their feedback, ultimately I ended up with a course that I felt a lot better, summed up all my learning, and I had that transcribed and then edited it and made it into the book, which became Do You Talk Funny? But I guess one of the questions was it repeatable what we did? So actually Inc. magazine came around with us for 6 weeks, and we took a friend of mine who was a business speaker with no experience in comedy, and we trained him up in comedy for 6 weeks before a business conference. Yep. And Inc. documented the whole thing, and they wrote about it, and then they videoed him, so you get to see a video before and after. So now that he'd used the comedian's techniques and he'd got used to putting in a bit more stage time, would he be a better business speaker? And it turns out he definitely was. And it turned into a pretty cool article. So that was kind of the process. We were seeing, can this stuff be summed up? Can it be pulled together? Can it be taught? And can it be repeated? And yeah, I've been going through that process for the last year, more or less.
Yeah. Oh, that's great to hear. And so one of the things I'm interested in is if you were talking to these top comedians and top business speakers, like what was your outreach process for those, to get in touch with those people? Because obviously they can be pretty hard to get a hold of, and it's such an important part of marketing and obviously the research process for you too, but is to get in touch with those people that will really have an impact on your work or help to convince your audience as well that what you've done is worthwhile.
Yeah, for sure. To be honest, I felt most of them overall were very open to answering specific questions. So if I wrote to them and it wasn't the usual, hey, love your stuff, very open-ended. If it was quite specific, like, hey, I read your book, I did these 9 things that you recommended. One thing I'm struggling with, can you help me or can you provide some information on this? I found they were pretty likely to reply. Also, the fact that I was starting up a conference series as well gave most business speakers something that they realized they need, exactly like comedians, more stage time. So if the conference series was of interest to them, they were also more likely to respond. But yeah, I reached out to all sorts of people that I had no business reaching out to whatsoever. And I'd say most of them.
Who might they be?
Everyone, like Tim Ferriss. A lot of the people you'll see that provided testimonials, like AJ Jacobs and Charlie Hohn and all sorts of people, Golden Globe winners, and you name it, they got an email from me with generally some humorous emails and the follow-up. So we'd send them all sorts of things, like a picture of the Cookie Monster just tapping his desk and looking a bit disappointed that you haven't wrote to him. So we actually have a blog post on that, if you go to funnybiz.co, but basically how to follow up the person. We have a gift me a follow-up, so using like little GIF videos instead of words, just to keep repeatedly following up with people. Gotcha. If they haven't wrote back to you. And there's a website that's really cool called Twofer, which is a company based out of San Francisco. But if you enter anybody's first name, last name, and domain name, it will validate and give you the most likely email for that person.
Right.
So it kind of allowed me to reach out to anyone.
Brilliant. I haven't heard of that service. It's a great one. We'll make sure
all
these are in the show notes. So.
Yeah, they're great. So even when you sign up, it'll give you about, I think, 100 credits for free.
Right.
To search people. But yeah, I find it was good for getting their personal email, like a Gmail email instead of their work email, that a lot of people were pretty likely to respond.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And so let's jump into the sort of marketing side of it then for the book, first up. And what's sort of been your experience in terms of marketing the book? I guess you had you had quite an audience already of people who are interested from buying your course. But exactly. How have you sort of approached the book? Because you worked with Tom Morquez too, of course, which is how we met.
Exactly.
And he's been on this show too, so that's been great.
Yeah, Tom was great. So I guess between us, we came up with who's most likely interested in this book, and then a method to try and chase them down or track them down or get it to influencers within that area, or get it to people that we just thought were crying out for it or had blogged on similar topics about it before. And the same with journalist outreach. So we basically just I wrote to any journalist who'd written anything around humor in public speaking. And most of them ran a story. So we used content, what Nils, my editor, would refer to as evergreen content from within the book. So things that are not likely to go out of date, steps you can take, concrete kind of learning points or a sequence where you can become a funnier speaker, inject humor. And we reached out to them and asked them, did they want to reprint some of those sections? But yeah, to be honest, I had no platform. Like, I didn't have any email list at the end of December, as Tom will tell you quite painfully when he was like, many email signups do you have? And I was like, I don't even have anything that asks them to sign up. Nor do I want one. And I don't want to be writing to everyone every week going, hey, look what I came up with this week. I'm just, Irish people hate self-marketing in any way, shape or form, because your friends down the pub will quickly make fun of you for doing it. So to be honest, for me, Udemy was the perfect platform for me to put the course on initially, because they did all the marketing for me.
Yeah.
So that audience, they were a rapidly growing company and they just received another round of funding and they were looking for new customers. So any good courses on there that they were proud of or were getting good reviews, high interaction rates, they tended to promote quite actively. So that built the initial audience. So I think I have 4,400 plus students on there, and they were definitely the early advocates for the book.
Yeah.
But great. Also, yeah, we got into a lot of co-working spaces as well, and people we knew have problems with public speaking or challenges with it, like new authors. All of a sudden you wrote a book, so you're like, oh, people keep calling you to talk about it, which is one of the biggest ironies of my book, because I hate public speaking. I still hate public speaking. So they're like, hey, will you come and talk to our team of accountants? And I'm like, go away. Didn't you read the book? Like, I hate public. Just read the book. I can't make accountants funny.
Oh, that's hilarious. It's so good. A comedian who doesn't like public speaking but has written a book about it. It's just like,
on reflection, it was the worst plan ever.
It's like an enigma wrapped in a conundrum, wrapped in something else, but it's a few layers in there, David. Absolutely.
It's entertaining, at least. I think at one stage, the course I had on Udemy at the start was literally me just talking over a bunch of slides. I mean, the production quality was terrible. And Udemy wrote to me and they're like, hey, we kind of like your course, but, you need to better produce it. Like, it's done pretty badly. We need you in the videos. And being afraid of public speaking, I really did not want to put myself in the videos whatsoever. And the bit of arm twisting, they got me to do it. So I left the uncomfortable versions in there. You can blatantly see that I don't want to be on video. Or that are nervously moving the hands. But yeah, it's a bit of an irony. But that would, to answer your question, that was the main platform, but also reaching out to people we thought would like the information or were fans of it. And there's a lot of high-level guys, if you listen to like James Altucher these days, blogging about the benefit of humor in public speaking. So he just wrote a post that was like the one thing you can do before your TED Talk, and it was listen to comedians. Like, and the same with the book, you like their Confessions of a Public Speaker. It was like, before you public speak, listen to how comedians do it. But I didn't really come across anybody who'd broke down that process and tried to apply it to the world of business. And so I figured, why not? I knew there was an interest in the topic because there's a lot, but I couldn't find anything that pulled it all together. And I figured, well, worst case scenario, if I just pulled all that information into one place, that it would be a useful resource.
And so your FunnyBiz conferences then, are they focused purely on applying humour to business, or is it broader than that?
It's basically like TED Talks, but all the speakers are actually really funny.
Right.
So all the guys we have are people who are successful in business or in the world of humor and performance somehow, or just happen to have a sneaky background in stand-up comedy, which is strangely common in the Bay Area, we found, here where I'm based. So we had the CEO of Twitter is an ex-improv performer. We had the head of creative from Airbnb, who used to be a stand-up comedian. We had the head of community from Lyft, the ride-sharing platform, who is an improv performer. So we had all sorts of people who were extremely comfortable on stage. But yeah, we have a real mix. So the underlying message of the conference is to create better content, you need to have a story, you need to make it entertaining, and you need creative techniques like improv to really flush out the ideas and play with it a bit and spend some more time on that creative process. So it's speakers from comedy, academics from the world of comedy and study. We have a lot of improv guys on there and a lot of experts in storytelling, designing to be more entertaining. You name it, we have it in there.
And so how do you go about marketing those conferences then?
yeah, it's a good question. We spent, I think on the very first one, we spent about $310 US on marketing it. So we weren't exactly going for world-beating strategies.
Yep.
We were doing a lot of web scraping techniques, which a lot of companies in the Bay Area tend to use, which is basically targeting platforms like Twitter, searching bio information for people that express an interest in a certain topic. So for us, it's business and humor. And then using software that will go through all the associated websites with those profiles and get those guys' email addresses.
Right. What sort of tools were they?
So we were using Import.io was one. There's a number of them, Twofer you can do it through, and there's one called Follower Wonk, which basically allows you to analyze people's Twitter followings and movements on Twitter. So you're able to quickly get a feel for a space, who the main players are. And most people that are active on promotion or writing in any way will have their own blog, and they will have somewhere on that blog with their contact information listed. Yep. So there's services out there that will allow you to go through en masse and pull that out. Now, where you have to be careful, obviously, is the messaging that you give to these people, because they did not agree to give you their email in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was our kind of hack technique for starting the conference in the first place. And now that we got some press associated with it, it tends to kind of sell itself a bit more. But yeah, retargeting ads on Facebook was key. Emails from Follower Wonk was key, and reaching out to people who had an audience in the area. A lot of startup community as well. A lot of young entrepreneur CEOs who are suddenly thrust into the spotlight of speaking, not only public speaking, but crafting content and the voice that they want to have for their company and the kind of culture that they want to create. So we worked with a lot of co-working spaces as well to get to those young kind of founder CEOs. Yeah.
And was there anything that didn't work that you found has just been a massive failure for you?
No, thankfully not. Touching all forms of wood I can find me around here. I'm sure there's one somewhere. No, I mean, to be honest, we were planning on scaling it up a bit, but getting sponsorship for a conference like the one we have, which is a little bit wacky. So most sponsors will want a very defined audience from a conference. Ours is kind of like, well, it's everybody who likes humor and to laugh. And they're like, yeah, that's great, but that's not exactly specific. So running an event without any form of sponsorship, and even the idea to do that in the first place, was not the best plan I've ever had. So it makes it very hard. And we originally had planned to scale the conferences a lot more, but I think in the future we'll move towards smaller meetup groups. Event management is hard work. Yeah, especially these days if you're trying to get people to take a full day off work. And does people know, if you're working for Salesforce or somebody, everything you're doing is being tracked, all your interactions are tracked, and if you miss 24 hours, that's a lot you're catching up on the next day, and you really got to make it work well. So it's hard we definitely make it work well, but it's hard to convince those guys in the first place to take the day off work. So yeah, for anyone planning on jumping into the conference space, I'd be like, think twice about it, because you're not making a whole lot of money on it. So yeah, if I was doing conferences to get rich, that would have been a spectacular failure, because you will lose money on it. I mean, the people who run conferences, the money is made through sponsorship, so you want to have it directed to a very, very specific crowd. And we did not do that, nor do we want to do that. And so I guess the failure was not realizing that early on.
What do you see as your primary benefit then out of the conferences?
I'd say it allows us to pull a lot of people together that are very much convinced that content needs to change, needs to be more engaging, and needs to use more humor. And those guys tended not to know each other previously. So it allows us to build a community around something that a lot of people were really passionate about. There's a lot of people that tend to be performers and become copywriters down the road. And as copywriters end up in many marketing departments of companies, entrusted with the job of creating content within their brand image. And those guys have never met each other. So it allows us to get them all together.
Yeah, it's actually certainly one thing we've found with running our events too, which we've done over the years, is that ability to be the organizer is a great way to connect the dots amongst the community. And also, I guess, there's a benefit to having been the facilitator of those connections too, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely allowed me to reach out to people that I admired. So I really liked watching TED Talks anyway, and I especially liked the ones personally that added a lot of humor to them. So it gave me a way to have these guys come and work on an event with me interactively as well. So for me as the organizer, it's also pretty cool. You get to meet people whose work you admire, and you get to hang out and share a few jokes with them and share an event with them, and hopefully contribute to a community of people who are really passionate about what you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff, David. A couple more questions before we wrap up is, who do you learn from?
I'm a book maniac. I go through, I was laughing at Mark Zuckerberg's goal to read like one book every 2 weeks there. It's like a man with his money, that's what he came out with this year as one of his goals.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Surely you should read a few more, mate. No offense. I guess he's more busy than I am. Slightly. But yeah, I've always believed that books are your mentors. So, everyone always says the value in getting a good mentor, but that can be time consuming, or you don't know who to approach, or you feel like you're being a pain in the bum asking someone for their time. I think a lot of people will have put their best thoughts down in a book, and they will have really struggled to create that book, as I have done when you're writing and editing. And, it's much more of a project than anyone ever thinks it's going to be. And I think that's a great way for you to continually learn the whole time and get access to a lot of thought leaders' process. And blogs are a great way of doing that, but I find books are a bit more curated and a bit more concise, at least the better ones these days in doing that. But yeah, that and podcasts, I think, are where I get most of my information. On the comedy side, it's definitely death by fire, trial and error, and spending way too much time in comedy and storytelling nights and clubs.
Yeah, awesome. And so just back to the books then, has there been a book that you would say has changed your life or your worldview?
I'm probably not the only one to ever say this, but I hate to go back to it because he has so many good books, but The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, it's a cracker, isn't it?
Yeah, it was magic. I read it just when it came out, and I think I was living in the Middle East at the time, and I managed to outsource my job to a couple of guys in India. And I had two offices I was meant to be in, and I pretended to be in both of them at the same time, and generally just went kite surfing.
Wow.
So it definitely just forced me to rethink things. And I think what a lot of people within that space, like A.J. Jacobs, who was quoted in that book originally, I became a big fan of his work. He tended to throw himself into 1 year intensive experiments in different topics and write about it. And that was kind of the motivation between Tim Ferriss, the reference to A.J. Jacobs within his original book, and then putting the approaches to learning from those two guys together kind of became my own book. So it was very heavily drawn on Tim Ferriss's approach to meta learning and A.J. Jacobs' approach to throwing yourself intensively into something for a year and seeing what you can get out of it.
And so were you able to speak to both of those guys for your book?
A.J. Jacobs, yeah, and he spoke at my conference as well. I met him at a conference last year. Tim Ferriss, I haven't spoke to. A number of common friends, but yeah, I haven't tracked him down yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, those books were hugely influential. I think at the time I'd been to 50-something countries and I'd had all sorts of mad jobs around the world, and I definitely was not rich or wealthy in any way, shape, or form. And a friend said to me, hey, this Tim Ferriss guy, you need to read his book. He does what you do, except he actually makes money from it. So you might want to read it and learn a few things. And it was a great book. It's a good rethink of like how you should be living life and what you should be doing with it.
Yeah, oh, that's cool. Thanks for sharing that. And do you have a favourite quote or piece of advice that you use for inspiration?
You already stole my favourite quote, which is the end of laughter is followed by the height of listening, I think. But I like, is it attributed to Napoleon, which is life is either a daring adventure or nothing.
Right.
I don't know if I want to quote Napoleon. It didn't work out too well for him. But yeah, I probably should figure out where that quote comes from. But yeah, one I like a lot.
Yep.
So just throw yourself into anything and see what happens.
Awesome. Well, finally then, how can listeners connect with you then?
So a blog, a wee bit, not too much, at 7comedyhabits.com. That's the number 7. And on the blog with Humour in Business, we have at FunnyBiz with 2z's.co. And the book is called Do You Talk Funny? But you'll find it on either of those two sites. I'm not hard to track down.
Awesome. All right, Dave. Well, thanks so much for joining me, mate, and thanks for sharing everything you have today, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. So that wraps up the interview with David Nihill. Thanks so much for joining me through to the end. This show is brought to you by our 33 free marketing templates, and you can download them at www.bluewiremedia.com.au/book. Now, the intent is to deliver actionable advice, so please let us know if you have any feedback or questions or guest suggestions as well. We'd love to hear it. You can contact me on toby.jenkins@bluewiremedia.com.au, or I'm on Twitter at Toby_Jenkins. If you enjoyed the show, we would love it if you could leave a review on iTunes. Until next time, thanks so much.